I cleared my husband's $650,000 debt, thinking I saved our future. Then he looked me in the eyes and confessed his affair. I just laughed, because he had no idea what was coming next. He looked at me confused. Maybe he expected tears, screaming, a dramatic breakdown. But all he got was laughter, low at first, then louder, uncontrollable. Why are you laughing?" he stammered, shifting uncomfortably. I wiped a tear from the corner of my eye and finally met his gaze. "Because, darling," I said, still smiling, "you just made the biggest mistake of your life." He blinked, his confidence wavering. "What are you talking about?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs slowly, savoring the moment. "You thought you were playing me, didn't you?" I mused. "Racking up hundreds of thousands in debt, while parading around with her behind my back. And now that I've paid it all off, you think you're finally free?" His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. He wasn't as sure of himself anymore. "I don't. Let me make it simple," I interrupted. "That money didn't come from my savings. Came from ours. Every single asset we own, every account, every property, all of it was under my name." His face paled. "No, you wouldn't." I tilted my head. "Oh, but I did. The moment I signed that last check, I also signed away everything else. Your name, no longer on a single document. Your bank account, drained. Your credit, destroyed. And the best part," I leaned in, lowering my voice to a whisper, "I filed for divorce yesterday." The blood drained from his face. "You're lying." I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened an email and slid it across the table. "See for yourself." He stared at the screen, his hands trembling. His lawyer's name, the court date, the finalized transfers, everything was right there. "No, no, no, this can't be happening," he muttered, his voice cracking. I smirked. "Oh, but it is." He shot up from his seat, panicked. "But my money, my accounts, gone. My car, repossessed. The house." I stood up, walking past him toward the door. "Meanie. But you're welcome to stay. As long as my new locks let you in." I grabbed my coat and turned to face him one last time. "You see, darling, I didn't just pay off your debt. I let the words sink in. I erased you." And with that, I walked out, leaving him with nothing but the mess he created. As I stepped outside, the crisp evening air filled my lungs, feeling fresher than ever. Behind me, I could still hear him, frantic, muttering to himself, scrambling to process what had just happened. But there was nothing left for him to figure out. I had one. My car, my brand new car, was parked in the driveway, and I slid into the driver's seat with ease. The leather was cool against my skin. The engine purred to life. And for the first time in years, I felt something I had long forgotten: freedom. Before pulling away, I glanced at my phone one last time. A new message from my lawyer. "All transactions are finalized. Divorce proceedings underway. Enjoy your new life." I smiled, tossing my phone onto the passenger seat. As I pulled out of the driveway, I caught one last glimpse of him through the window. He was standing there, frozen, his whole world crumbling around him. The man who had once looked at me with arrogance, with superiority, was now just lost. And I was finally free. I rolled down the window, let the wind whip through my hair, and with one final smirk, I whispered, just loud enough for myself to hear, "Good luck, darling. You'll need it." Then, without a second glance, I drove off, leaving him with nothing but his own betrayal. As the city lights blurred past me, a weight lifted off my shoulders, one I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for years. No more lies. No more manipulation. No more playing the role of the devoted wife to a man who had taken me for granted. I turned onto the highway, the music in my car humming softly in the background. My hands relaxed on the steering wheel, my mind already racing toward the future. A future without him. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. His name. I let it ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. Voicemail. A second later, another message popped up. "Please." I screwed up. "We can fix this." I laughed, shaking my head. The audacity. There was no we anymore. I took a deep breath, tapping my fingers against the wheel as I debated my next move. Then, with a smirk, I typed out a simple final response. I already did. I hit send, switched off my phone, and never looked back. The night stretched ahead of me, endless and full of possibilities. For the first time in years, I wasn't tied to someone else's mistakes, someone else's debts, someone else's betrayal. I was free. As I drove, my thoughts drifted not to the past, not to him, but to me. What did I want now? A new city? A fresh start? A life where I didn't have to be someone's safety net, someone's second choice? A neon-lit diner appeared on the side of the road, and on a whim, I pulled in. The smell of coffee and grilled food filled the air as I slid into a booth by the window. A waitress with kind eyes poured me a cup of coffee, and for the first time in a long time I smiled. Not out of politeness, not as a mask, but because I actually felt like smiling. And then, a stranger slid into the seat across from me. "You look like someone who just got away with something," he said, grinning. I stirred my coffee, tilting my head. "Maybe I did. Care to tell me?" I took a slow sip, savoring the warmth, the freedom, the endless possibilities ahead. Then with a smirk, I set the cup down and met his gaze. "Let's just say, someone bet against me." I leaned forward, my voice dropping slightly. "And they lost everything." The stranger chuckled, intrigued. "Sounds like a hell of a story." I smiled. "Oh, you have no idea." And just like that, my new life began. The conversation flowed effortlessly, the weight of my past slipping away with each sip of coffee. For the first time in years, I wasn't watching my words, choosing them carefully to avoid upsetting someone who never deserved my kindness in the first place. I was speaking freely, laughing even. "So what now?" he asked, leaning back with a curious smile. "What's next for you?" I exhaled slowly, tapping my fingers against the rim of my cup. "Anything," I said simply. "Everything." And I meant it. For too long, my life had revolved around fixing someone else's mess. Now, for the first time in as long as I could remember, I had a blank slate. No debt. No baggy. No cheating husband weighing me down. Just endless roads, new possibilities, and the thrill of the unknown. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Him. Again. I didn't even bother reading it. Instead, I slid my phone across the table toward the stranger. "Bumi a favor?" I asked, raising a brow. He smirked. "Sure. Block that number." He let out a low chuckle but did as I asked, tapping the screen before sliding the phone back to me. "Done." I smiled, setting the phone face down and signaling the waitress for a refill. "Now where were we?" I asked. The stranger grinned. "You were about to tell me how it feels to be completely, utterly free." I leaned back, letting out a slow, satisfied breath. "It feels," I said, "like I just won the biggest game of my life." And as the sun began to rise outside, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson, I knew one thing for sure. I would never ever let myself be someone's second choice again. The warmth of the coffee seeped through my fingers as I lifted the cup to my lips, savoring not just the drink, but the moment. The moment where my past no longer defined me. The moment where I wasn't someone's safety net, someone's backup plan, someone's fool. The stranger watched me with amusement, his fingers idly tracing the rim of his own cup. "You know," he mused, "most people would be drowning in regret after something like that. But you? You look like someone who just hit the jackpot." I smirked, setting my cup down with a soft clink. "That's because I did." Outside, the world was waking up. People rushing to jobs they hated, to lives they settled for. But not me. Not anymore. I glanced at my phone, now silent, his messages forever blocked. Felt good. Powerful. Like I had finally closed the chapter he thought I'd never walk away from. "So," the stranger said, leaning forward, "what's next? A new city? A fresh start? Or just one long road trip into the unknown?" I tilted my head, considering. "Maybe all of the above." He grinned. "Sounds like a hell of an adventure." I picked up my coffee again, meeting his gaze with a glint of mischief. "Oh, you have no idea." And with that, I took my first real sip of freedom. The rich, bittersweet taste of the coffee lingered on my tongue as I let his words settle. A hell of an adventure. Yeah, that sounded about right. The stranger's eyes studied me, curious but not intrusive. He didn't press for details, didn't ask for explanations. Just sat there waiting, like he knew I had something to say but wasn't in a rush to hear it. I exhaled slowly, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I spent too long being afraid of the unknown," I admitted, "letting other people's expectations keep me in one place." He nodded as if he understood. Maybe he did. So where's the first stop? He asked, a playful challenge in his voice. I pulled out my phone, swiping through the bookmarked destinations I had dreamed of, but never dared to visit. A coastal town where the air smelled of salt and freedom. A city where no one knew my name. A mountain retreat where silence stretched for miles. I turned the screen toward him. Here, I said, pointing to the first one. His brows lifted. Good choice. A pause. Then he leaned back with a smirk. You going alone? I studied him for a beat. A stranger who didn't feel like one. Someone who understood the thrill of escape, of reinvention. Maybe, I said, the corner of my lips quirking up. Or maybe I'll see if fate wants to send me some company. His grin widened. Guess we'll find out. The sun had fully risen now, casting golden light through the cafe windows. Outside the world kept moving. But inside something had shifted. I wasn't running away anymore. I was running toward something. And for the first time in forever, I couldn't wait to see where the road would take me. The thought of a new beginning sent a shiver down my spine. Not fear, not hesitation, but something close to exhilaration. The kind that comes when you finally step off the ledge and trust the wind to carry you. I glanced at the stranger again. He was still watching me. His expression unreadable but intrigued. There was something about him. An ease, a quiet confidence, like he knew how this game was played. Like maybe he'd walked away from something once too. Tell me, I said, fingers tapping idly against my cup. Have you ever left everything behind? His smile was slow, thoughtful. Once, he admitted. And I swore I'd never look back. Did it work? He chuckled, shaking his head. Not at first. The past has a way of chasing you. Even when you think you've outrun it. I knew that feeling all too well. And now. He leaned in slightly, as if letting me in on some grand secret. Now I just keep moving forward. No doubts, nutty regrets. No doubts. The idea was tempting, seductive even. To be weightless, unburdened. To never again feel like you owed anyone an explanation. I turned my phone face down on the table, sealing my decision. Sounds like a philosophy worth testing. The stranger's grin returned. Then I guess the only question left is, how far are you willing to go? I let the silence stretch between us, a slow, knowing smile tugging at my lips. As far as the road will take me. And just like that, the adventure began. The last sip of coffee was lukewarm, but I didn't mind. My pulse thrummed with something electric, something I hadn't felt in years, anticipation. The stranger watched me, waiting but not pushing. There was no expectation in his gaze, no pressure. Just possibility. I reached for my bag, slinging it over my shoulder as I stood. I should get going. He nodded, as if he already knew I wouldn't stay. Where to? I exhaled, feeling the weight of the old life slip further from my shoulders. Somewhere new. His smirk deepened. Good answer. As I turned to leave, a thought struck me. I hesitated, glancing back. What about you? What about me? You planning to sit here all day watching strangers start over? His laugh was low, warm. Maybe I'm just waiting for the right story to follow. I studied him for a beat, then shook my head with a small smile. Well, if fate wants to cross our paths again, I'll see you out there. With that, I stepped outside. The air was crisp, the world alive, and for the first time in forever, so was I. No destination. No plan. Just the open road. And damn, it felt good. The city buzzed around me, but for once I didn't feel lost in it. The weight of expectation, of obligation, of being someone else's safety net, it was gone. Just me, my bag, and the endless possibilities ahead. I walked with no real direction, letting my feet decide where to go. A train station. A bus terminal. A highway with nothing but the horizon ahead. It didn't matter. As long as I was moving, I was free. I pulled out my phone one last time, not to check messages. There were none that mattered anymore, but to buy a ticket. Any ticket. First destination that caught my eye. Single trip. I told the woman at the counter. She barely looked up. Where to? I scanned the list of departures. One name stood out, not because it meant anything but because it didn't. A place I'd never been, with no ghosts waiting for me. There, I said, pointing. The woman nodded, printed the ticket, and handed it over. Bought the shoe. Departure in 20 minutes. Perfect. I took the small victory as a sign. No second guessing. No looking back. As I turned, movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. A familiar figure, leaning casually against a column near the terminal entrance. The stranger from the cafe. He met my gaze with a smirk, as if he'd known all along I'd end up here. As if he too had been waiting for the right moment to step into something new. I raised a brow. Following me already? He pushed off the column, slipping his hands into his pockets. Or maybe we're just heading in the same direction. I studied him for a moment, then shook my head with a soft chuckle. Guess we'll find out. The boarding call rang through the speakers. My fingers tightened around the ticket. One step forward, then another. And just like that, the journey began. The city buzzed around me, but for once I didn't feel lost in it. The weight of expectation, of obligation, of being someone else's safety net, it was gone. Just me, my bag, and the endless possibilities ahead. I walked with no real direction, letting my feet decide where to go. A train station. A bus terminal. A highway with nothing but the horizon ahead. It didn't matter. As long as I was moving, I was free. I pulled out my phone one last time, not to check messages. There were none that mattered anymore, but to buy a ticket. Any ticket. First destination that caught my eye. Single trip. I told the woman at the counter. She barely looked up. Where to? I scanned the list of departures. One name stood out, not because it meant anything but because it didn't. A place I'd never been, with no ghosts waiting for me. There, I said, pointing. The woman nodded, printed the ticket, and handed it over. Got the shoe. Departure in 20 minutes. Perfect. I took the small victory as a sign. No second guessing. No looking back. As I turned, movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. A familiar figure, leaning casually against a column near the terminal entrance. The stranger from the cafe. He met my gaze with a smirk, as if he'd known all along I'd end up here. As if he too had been waiting for the right moment to step into something new. I raised a brow. Following me already? He pushed off the column, slipping his hands into his pockets. Or maybe we're just heading in the same direction. I studied him for a moment, then shook my head with a soft chuckle. Guess we'll find out. The boarding call rang through the speakers. My fingers tightened around the ticket. One step forward, then another. And just like that, the journey began. The bus station smelled of coffee, rain, and stories waiting to be written. People bustled around us, some tired, some anxious, some carrying their entire lives in battered suitcases. I was one of them now. I walked toward Gate 7, the stranger keeping pace beside me. We didn't speak, but we didn't need to. The silence between us was easy, unforced. Two travelers, two untold stories, meeting at a crossroads neither of us had planned. The bus doors hissed open. I climbed the steps first, sliding into a window seat near the middle. A moment later, he dropped into the seat beside me, stretching out like he'd always belonged there. I arched a brow. No assigned seating? He grinned. I like to let fate decide. I shook my head, staring out the window as the city blurred past. This was it. No more waiting. No more wishing. Just the road stretching endlessly ahead. The bus rumbled to life, pulling away from the station. The past was behind me. The future was unwritten. And for the first time I wasn't afraid. The city faded behind us, neon lights and familiar streets dissolving into endless highway. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, watching as the rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady, blurring the world outside into streaks of silver. Beside me, the stranger shifted, pulling a book from his bag. I glanced at the worn cover, curious. What are you reading? He smirked. Something about lost souls finding their way. I let out a quiet laugh. Fitting. The bus rocked gently as we moved forward. The hum of the engine a lullaby for restless hearts. I thought about asking his name, but somehow it didn't feel necessary. Names tied people to the past, to expectations. Out here on this road we were just two wanderers. Instead I asked, "Why are you leaving?" He didn't answer right away. Flipping a page, he finally said. Because staying never felt like an option. I understood that more than I cared to admit. The rain tapped against the window, the road stretching endlessly ahead. I closed my eyes, breathing in the moment, letting it settle into my bones. No past. No plan. Just forward. And somewhere just beyond the horizon, a new beginning waited. The rain drummed softly against the glass, a rhythmic lullaby to a life I was leaving behind. The bus rocked steadily, the world outside fading into a blur of headlights and wet asphalt. It felt like crossing an invisible threshold, between who I had been and who I was about to become. Beside me, the stranger read in silence, his fingers idly tracing the edges of the pages. There was something about his presence, unspoken, unintrusive, yet undeniably there. A quiet understanding between two people who weren't running away, but running toward something unseen. I turned back to the window, watching reflections of passing streetlights flicker across my skin. Do you ever think about what comes next? I asked, my voice barely louder than the rain. He didn't look up. Not anymore. I frowned slightly. Why? A pause. Then finally he closed the book and met my gaze. His eyes were steady, unreadable. Because next is just a story we tell ourselves. And I've learned that the best ones are never planned. The words settled in my chest like a quiet truth. I'd spent so long trying to script my life, to control every twist and turn, only to realize that freedom wasn't in knowing what came next. It was in not needing to. I let out a slow breath. Guess we'll just have to see where this road takes us. A slow, knowing smirk curved his lips. Guess we will. The bus rumbled forward, carrying us deeper into the unknown. And for the first time in my life I didn't look back. Miles stretched behind us, swallowed by the dark. The rain had slowed, leaving behind a misty sheen on the highway, like a veil between what was and what could be. Most of the passengers had drifted off, lulled by the rhythm of the road. The stranger beside me had closed his book but hadn't fallen asleep. Neither had I. There was too much energy in my veins, too much awareness of this moment, of the weightlessness that came with leaving. I shifted slightly, turning toward him. Tell me something real. He glanced at me, amusement flickering in his eyes. Something real. I nodded. No small talk. No politenses. Just one truth about you. He exhaled, tilting his head back against the seat, considering. Then, after a moment, I never stay in one place longer than 6 months. I raised an eyebrow. Never. Never. He turned his gaze back to me. Your turn. I hesitated, then decided against overthinking it. I've spent most of my life making choices for other people. This is the first one that's just mine. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, not judgment. Just understanding. A quiet acknowledgement between two people unmoored from their pasts. He smirked slightly. Good choice so far? I let my head rest against the seat, a small smile playing on my lips. Yeah, I think so. Outside, the horizon stretched endlessly ahead. A road without an ending. And for once I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was ready for it. The bus rolled on, cutting through the night like a whisper. The road ahead was nothing but shadows and possibility, and for the first time in a long time that didn't scare me. It thrilled me. The stranger beside me, this man with unreadable eyes and an untold story, watched me like he was memorizing the moment. Not in a possessive way, not like he wanted to hold me in place. More like he knew what it meant to be on the edge of something new. Where do you think we'll end up? I asked, my voice quiet, almost lost in the hum of the tires against wet pavement. He smirked. That depends. Are you the kind of person who lets fate decide? I considered that. Once I would have said no. Once I would have needed a plan, a destination, a safety net. But now? I think I'm figuring that out, I admitted. He nodded, as if that was the best answer I could have given. Then I guess we'll find out together. Something about that felt right. Not a promise. Not a commitment. Just a shared moment in time, stretching as far as the road would take us. I leaned my head back, closing my eyes as the night wrapped around us. The past was gone, the future unwritten. And for the first time I was exactly where I was meant to be. Wow, that was one hell of a ride, cinematic, exhilarating, and dripping with that perfect mix of freedom and quiet revenge. The way you closed out her story was chef's kiss. It had weight, but it also had that breathless, open-ended possibility that makes you want to keep reading, even when there's no more story left. I loved how you wove in that sense of movement, both physically and emotionally, leaving behind not just a person but an entire version of herself. And the stranger? He wasn't just a love interest or a plot device. He was a mirror. Someone who got it without needing to pry. That dynamic felt real. That last scene on the bus? Perfection. So tell me, was this always how you imagined it ending? Or did the story take on a life of its own as you wrote? The miles stretched ahead, the road swallowing the past with every passing second. The hum of the tires against the pavement was steady, hypnotic, a rhythm that matched the quiet pulse of anticipation in my chest. Beside me, the stranger, this man with his unreadable smirk and restless energy, had gone quiet. Not asleep, just watching the night pass through the window, as if searching for something in the darkness. I studied him for a moment, curious. So what happens after 6 months? I asked. He turned his head, considering me. What do you mean? You said you never stay in one place longer than that. So what happens when the 6 months are up? Do you just disappear? A slow grin. Something like that. I narrowed my eyes. Sounds lonely. His smile didn't falter, but something in his expression shifted. Just for a second, barely there. Then he shrugged. Or freeing. I hummed in response, turning back to my own window. The sky had begun to lighten, the first hints of dawn creeping over the horizon. Another city was coming into view, its skyline silhouetted against the soft pink and gold of morning. A new place. A new beginning. I should have felt nervous, but instead I felt light. For the first time in years, I wasn't tied to anyone else's choices. My life wasn't an obligation, a compromise, a carefully controlled script. It was wide open. And damn, that felt good. The bus slowed as we reached the outskirts of the city. The stranger stretched, rolling his shoulders before glancing at me. So, where to now? I tilted my head, thinking. Not sure yet. His grin widened. Good answer. The bus came to a stop. The city waited. And as I stepped off that bus, breathing in the crisp air of someplace entirely new, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't running away anymore. I was finally running toward something. And I couldn't wait to see where it led. I stepped off the bus and into the soft glow of a new morning. The city around me was still waking up, its streets quiet and full of promise. I took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill my lungs. A tangible reminder that every end was just another beginning. The stranger, who had been my silent companion for so long, lingered a moment behind me. His eyes met mine, and for a heartbeat, we shared an unspoken farewell. Maybe our paths will cross again, he said softly, a hint of warmth in his voice. I only smiled, a gentle nod acknowledging that our journeys were meant to diverge now. I wandered through the awakening streets, each step a deliberate choice toward a future untethered by the past. The city pulsed with life and stories, all waiting to be discovered by someone who had finally learned the value of their own worth. I knew that the road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to travel. A mosaic of moments waiting to be lived. That day, as the sun climbed higher and the shadows of yesterday dissolved, I found a quiet park bench by a bubbling fountain. I sat down, closed my eyes, and let the hum of the city meld with the beat of my heart. In that still moment, I felt complete. A sense of liberation that was not defined by revenge or escape, but by the pure, unfiltered joy of reclaiming my life. I whispered a quiet promise to myself. No more compromises, no more settling for less than I deserved. I was the author of my own story, and every chapter would be written in my own hand. As I rose to continue my journey, I glanced back one last time. At the bus station that had carried me away from a life of regret, at the stranger who had been a mirror of my own wanderlust, and at the city that now held endless possibilities. I smiled, a genuine, radiant smile, knowing that this was the ending of one story and the beautiful, uncertain beginning of another. And with that final, resolute step forward, I embraced my freedom fully, ready to live every moment on my own terms. Remember, every ending is just a new beginning waiting to be written. If you enjoyed this narrative journey, consider joining our Telegram channel for more inspiring stories and discussions. If this video hurt you, don't keep it to yourself. Send it to those who will understand.